In the morning light, Jack watched his 5-year-old daughter, Emily, get ready for school, her tiny face filled with determination as she carefully brushed her hair. Their home was filled with warmth and the joy of simple family moments, Emily's curiosity, Jack's loving support, and the comfort of Sarah's presence. But underneath this happiness, there was a growing unease, a tension that neither Jack nor Sarah could quite explain. Emily's innocent questions about life and death, and later, her strange remarks about the new daycare nurse, Veronica, began to stir up unsettling emotions. What started as a sweet, typical day took a turn as Sarah became consumed with doubt, believing that Jack was hiding something from her. The happy family facade began to crack, leading to a confrontation that threatened to tear them apart. Just when it seemed all was lost, a shocking revelation brought them back together. Veronica wasn't a stranger but Jack's long-lost sister, a connection Emily unknowingly uncovered. This twist of fate, combined with Jack's determination to save his marriage, led to a renewed sense of hope and unity. As the family welcomed not one but 2 new members into their lives, the story that started with happiness, dipped into sorrow, and filled with fear, ended in a celebration of love and family, stronger than ever. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The gentle rays of the morning sun filtered softly through the rose-colored curtains in Emily's cozy bedroom, casting a warm glow on the delicate surroundings of the 5-year-old's haven. Her father, Jack, stood quietly at the doorway, his heart swelling with a tender amusement as he watched his little girl, so full of life and determination. Emily, with her tiny hands meticulously brushing her dark, silky hair in front of the heart-shaped mirror, was almost ready to embark on another day at school. "Pumpkin," he called out softly, his voice laced with affection. Emily turned her gaze towards him, her reflection in the mirror, showing a face of pure concentration, her brow slightly furrowed in thought. "Almost ready, Daddy," she replied earnestly. "I want to make sure I look perfect." Jack couldn't help but chuckle, a warm, familiar sound that filled the room. That was his Emily, his bright little star, always striving for excellence, always determined to give her very best. Her preschool teacher, Mrs. Allen, often marveled at Emily's maturity and insight, remarking how rare it was to encounter a child with such an old soul. "You know, Lily has already started reading chapter books," Emily shared as she carefully placed her brush back on the pristine white vanity. "I think I'm ready to try one too." "Is that right? Well then, how about we visit the library after school and pick out a special one just for you," Jack offered, his heart warming at the thought of sharing this moment with his daughter. Emily's eyes sparkled with joy, her face lighting up like the morning sun. "Oh, Daddy, that would be wonderful." "Thank you so much." Without a second thought, she dashed over to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a tight, heartfelt hug. Jack's chest swelled with love as he gently stroked her hair, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. What had he done to be blessed with such a kind, inquisitive, and special little girl? If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Downstairs, the familiar sounds of breakfast being prepared reached his ears, accompanied by the comforting clatter of dishes. His wife, Sarah, was bustling in the kitchen, likely setting the table for the morning meal. The thought of a hot breakfast and a strong cup of coffee seemed like a welcome reprieve after the long, exhausting hours he had put in at work throughout the week. All Jack yearned for was a peaceful weekend spent in the warmth of his family's love. However, as soon as Jack settled into his chair at the kitchen table, Emily climbed up beside him, her bright green eyes alight with curiosity and deep thought. "Daddy," she began in her sweet, sincere voice, "I've been wondering, where do people go when they die? Mrs. Allen said they go to heaven, but my friend Ava told me there's no proof of that. She thinks people just disappear forever. but that can't be true, can it? Jack gently placed his coffee mug on the table, the warmth of the drink fading as he processed her profound question. He glanced over at Sarah, silently seeking her help, but she simply raised her eyebrows, a small smile playing on her lips, as if to say she's all yours before 8 a.m. Jack sighed, knowing his quiet morning was now a distant hope. Even at such a young age, Emily had a way of drawing him into these deep, soul-searching conversations. Her endless curiosity and the depth of her questions never ceased to astonish him, leaving him both amazed and humbled by the mind of his extraordinary little girl. "Well, Pumpkin," I think Jack started, carefully choosing his words as he attempted to explain the delicate and complex concept of life after death in a way that his little girl could grasp. He caught Sarah's gaze, her eyes a mixture of awe and unease, as she looked at their daughter, who seemed far too mature for her tender age. Later, as Jack stood at the sink rinsing the breakfast dishes, Sarah quietly approached him, lowering her voice as if not to disturb the tranquility of the morning. "Jack, don't you think it's a bit unusual, the way Emily thinks and talks?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I mean, what kind of 5-year-old ponders the afterlife so seriously?" Jack paused, the pride evident in his tone. "Not a typical 5-year-old, that's for sure. She's exceptional." "I know she is," Sarah agreed, though her worry remained. "But sometimes I wonder, is it healthy for her to be so serious all the time, so far ahead of other kids her age?" Jack draped an arm around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her close. "Emily is exactly who she's meant to be," he reassured her softly. "Let's nurture her uniqueness. She'll be just fine." Sarah leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, seeking comfort in his words. "I hope you're right." A few moments later, Emily came bouncing into the kitchen, her purple backpack slung over one shoulder, ready to conquer the day. "I'm ready." "Okay, Pumpkin. Let's get you to school," Jack said, grabbing his keys and giving Sarah a quick, affectionate kiss before heading out the door with their daughter. As Jack navigated the morning traffic, his thoughts drifted to Sarah's recent behavior. She had been distant, on edge, almost as if she was harboring a secret. It wasn't like her to keep things bottled up. They had always been open and honest with each other since their college days. This new tension gnawed at Jack, stirring up old, unsettling memories of his parents' deeply troubled marriage, the shouting matches, the cold, silent treatments, the constant undercurrent of strife. He remembered how his father's harshness and his mother's perpetual sadness had eventually torn the family apart. The last thing Jack wanted was to fall into the same destructive patterns. Shaking off the uneasy thoughts, Jack pulled up to the Sunshine Daycare Center. Emily was already unbuckling herself, eager to dive into her day. "Bye, Daddy. Love you," she chirped as she hopped out and skipped away. "Hold on," Emily, Jack called after her. She stopped and turned back, her pigtails swaying with the movement. "Yes, Daddy." "Be good today, okay? No more trying to make things right by pushing the other kids around." Emily frowned, the expression eerily similar to her mother's when faced with an uncomfortable truth. "But Daddy, it's not fair that Danny hit Ava yesterday. I need to give him a piece of my mind." "Oh, there," Punisher Jack chuckled. "Let Mrs. Allen handle Danny, all right? You're not the playground police." "Fine," Emily sighed in reluctant agreement. "I'll be good. But if he does it again..." "Then you tell a teacher, okay? No vigilante justice, little miss. Capice?" "Capice," she grumbled, clearly not satisfied but willing to comply. Mrs. Allen, a kind woman with a warm smile, approached them as they entered. "Good morning, Emily, Mr. Spencer. Ready to take on the world today, Emily?" "Always," Mrs. Allen, Emily replied with a grin. Then she looked back at her father. "Don't worry, Daddy. I'll be nice, even to Danny." Jack and Mrs. Allen exchanged amused glances as Emily marched confidently through the colorful doors of the daycare. "She's certainly a force to be reckoned with," Mrs. Allen observed, her eyes twinkling. "That she is," Jack agreed with a smile. "Just let me know if she causes any more trouble." "Will do. Have a great day, Mr. Spencer." As Jack waved goodbye, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of mischief his little avenger would get into today. With Emily, one thing was certain: life was never dull. "Give it back!" The sharp cry snapped Mrs. Allen out of her thoughts. She looked up from her attendance sheet to see Emily grappling with Danny over a blue toy truck in the center of the playroom. Danny's face was flushed with frustration as he tried to yank the truck from Emily's determined grip. "Emily, Danny, what's going on here?" Mrs. Allen hurried over to the pair, her voice firm. "Danny hit Ava with this truck yesterday, and now he's trying to do it again," Emily said heatedly, her small frame rigid with indignation. "I'm stopping him." "That's not true," Danny shouted back, his voice shaking. "I wasn't going to hit her. Ava, tell her." Ava, who had been quietly coloring in the corner, looked up, her eyes wide with anxiety. "I don't want to get involved." Mrs. Allen raised her hands to calm them. "All right, enough of this. Emily, we've talked about this before. It's not your job to police the other children. And Danny, remember, we keep our hands to ourselves. If you can't play nicely with the truck, then no one will play with it." But Mrs. Allen, Emily began to protest, her face a picture of righteous anger. "No buts," the teacher said firmly, extending her hand to take the truck. "Now, give me the toy. You two need some time apart. Emily, why don't you go find a book to read?" And Danny. But before she could finish, Danny suddenly lashed out in a final, desperate attempt to seize control. He swung the truck wildly, smacking Emily's hand. The force caused her to jerk back, and in the chaos, the truck slammed into her face. Almost immediately, a thin stream of blood began to trickle from her nose. "Oh my goodness, Emily, are you okay?" Mrs. Allen exclaimed, grabbing tissues as she rushed to stop the bleeding. Her eyes shot daggers at Danny, who now looked stricken with guilt. "Daniel Mitchell, that behavior is completely unacceptable. Go to the quiet corner and put your head down. We'll be having a serious talk with your parents about this." Danny, looking both defiant and ashamed, slunk away to the designated corner, while Mrs. Allen turned her full attention to Emily. The little girl's face was a mix of pain and distress, her bottom lip trembling as she fought back tears. "Is it broken?" Emily's voice wavered, full of worry. "Am I going to look ugly now?" "Oh, sweetheart, no," Mrs. Allen reassured her gently, dabbing at the blood. "It's not broken, just a little bruised. You could never look ugly, not ever. But let's take you to the nurse to get cleaned up, okay?" If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Emily nodded, though her eyes were downcast, and allowed Mrs. Allen to guide her out of the now tumultuous playroom. The teacher's heart ached for her. Despite Emily's brave front, she was still just a small child who yearned for love and acceptance. As they made their way down the narrow hallway, they almost bumped into a young woman in brightly colored scrubs. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the woman said, flashing a surprised smile. She had a kind, pretty face with short, chin-length blonde hair that framed her features. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Veronica, the new nurse." Mrs. Allen returned the smile. "Diane Allen, it's wonderful to have you here, Veronica. I was just bringing Emily to see you. She had a bit of a mishap and bumped her nose." Veronica knelt at Emily's level, her blue eyes filled with gentle concern. "Oh dear, that doesn't sound fun. Let's get you all fixed up, okay? I've got some Paw Patrol Band-Aids with your name on them." But Emily wasn't focused on the Band-Aids. She was staring at Veronica with an intensity that made both women pause. "I know you," Emily said slowly, her voice filled with certainty. Veronica blinked in surprise. "You do?" "I'm sorry, sweetie, but I don't think we've met before." "No, we have," Emily insisted. "My daddy has your picture." Veronica and Mrs. Allen exchanged puzzled glances. "Emily, I don't think," Mrs. Allen began to say, but Emily interrupted her. "It's in his wallet. He looks at it when he thinks I'm not watching." "But it's you. I know it is." An awkward silence fell over them. Mrs. Allen cleared her throat, trying to brush off the strange tension. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," she said with a forced chuckle. "Let's get some ice on that nose and get you back to class, okay?" Emily allowed herself to be led away, but she kept glancing back at Veronica, who now wore a look of deep discomfort. As they rounded the corner, Mrs. Allen couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. What had Emily meant by that? Surely it was just the wild imagination of a child. But then again, why had she seemed so sure? Pushing the thought aside, Mrs. Allen focused on taking care of Emily's injury. There would be time to unravel this little mystery later. Meanwhile, Sarah pulled into the parking lot of the Sunshine Daycare Center, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. An inexplicable sense of dread had weighed on her all day, refusing to let her mind rest. But as she spotted Emily waiting by the playground, her heart lifted at the sight of her daughter, always a soothing balm to her worries. However, her relief quickly turned to concern when she noticed the small square of gauze taped across Emily's nose. "Hi, sweetie," Sarah called out, trying to keep her voice light despite the sudden worry gnawing at her. "What happened to your nose?" "Danny hit me with a truck," Emily replied nonchalantly, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "But it's okay. The new nurse fixed me up." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," Sarah said, crouching down to gently examine her daughter's face, her heart aching at the sight. "We'll be talking to Mrs. Allen about Danny's behavior." As if the universe had aligned with her inner turmoil, the plump, warm-hearted teacher, Mrs. Allen, approached them at the gate. But something was amiss. Instead of the familiar bright smile that usually adorned her face, a strange, almost unsettling expression flickered across her features, casting a shadow over her usual demeanor. "Mrs. Spencer, could I have a word with you in private?" she requested, her voice unusually tense, her eyes flitting nervously between Sarah and Emily. A cold knot of anxiety began to tighten in Sarah's stomach, a foreboding sense of dread that she couldn't quite shake. "Of course. Emily, why don't you go play on the swings for a little while?" she suggested, her voice steady but her heart racing. Sarah watched her daughter skip away, her tiny figure growing smaller as she reached the playground. Once Emily was safely out of earshot, Sarah turned back to Mrs. Allen, trying to maintain a facade of calmness. "Is everything all right? Other than Emily's injury, I mean." Mrs. Allen hesitated, a slight tremor in her voice as she continued. "Well, there's something Emily mentioned earlier that was rather peculiar. As I was escorting her to the nurse's office, she claimed that her father had a photograph of our new nurse, Veronica, tucked away in his wallet. She said he often gazes at it when he thinks she's not looking." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet, disbelief and confusion swirling in her mind. What? That's absurd. Why on earth would Jack carry a picture of the daycare nurse in his wallet? Mrs. Allen offered a cautious nod, her eyes filled with concern. "I agree, it's very odd. I thought perhaps Emily was mistaken or letting her imagination get the best of her, but she was adamant about it." A wave of icy fear washed over Sarah, chilling her to the bone. Yet she forced herself to remain composed, her face a mask of controlled neutrality. "I'm sure it's nothing more than a child's fanciful imagination. You know how kids can be at this age, always dreaming up stories." Mrs. Allen nodded, but her unease was palpable. "Yes, that's likely all it is. I just thought you should be informed in case." Well, I'm sure it's nothing. Please just forget I mentioned it. With an effort, Sarah mustered a smile, though it felt like a brittle shield against the storm brewing inside her. Consider it forgotten. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. As she moved toward the playground, her steps felt heavy, her mind spinning with a whirlwind of thoughts. It had to be a mistake, a child's innocent misinterpretation. Surely Jack couldn't. Mommy, are you okay? Emily's voice broke through the fog of Sarah's thoughts, her daughter's wide green eyes staring up at her with unnerving perceptiveness. You look sad. Sarah quickly masked her turmoil with a reassuring smile. No, sweetie, everything's fine. Mommy's just a little tired. That's all. She squeezed Emily's hand, suddenly desperate to leave this place, to escape the unsettling seed of doubt that had taken root in her heart. Let's go home, sweetheart. As they walked toward the parking lot, a woman in bright, cheerful scrubs emerged from the building and headed toward a sleek blue sedan. The fading sunlight highlighted her blonde hair, framing her youthful, radiant face in a golden halo. Sarah's stomach clenched as Emily pointed excitedly. Look, Mommy. That's Veronica, the nurse I was telling you about. Sarah's gaze followed her daughter's outstretched finger, landing on the young woman. Veronica was beautiful, with the effortless allure of someone in the prime of their life, mid-20s at most, with a vivaciousness that seemed to glow from within. She was exactly the kind of woman men like Jack were drawn to, fresh-faced, lively and untouched by the wear and tear of years. Without thinking, Sarah's hand rose to her face, her fingers tracing the fine lines etched by time and experience. When had she become so tired looking? When had her hair lost its shine, her skin its youthful resilience? A crushing wave of self-doubt swept over her, leaving her feeling worn and discarded, like an old book gathering dust on a forgotten shelf. How could she possibly compete with someone like Veronica? What chance did she stand of keeping her husband's affection when he could be enchanted by the fresh, unspoiled beauty of another? Mommy, can we go now? I'm hungry. Emily's voice, small and innocent, pierced through the dark cloud of Sarah's spiraling thoughts. Sarah blinked, forcing herself back to the present, swallowing the lump of fear that had lodged in her throat. Of course, sweetie, she replied, her voice hollow, the words tasting of ashes. Let's go home. As they walked away, the image of Veronica's radiant smile lingered in Sarah's mind, a haunting reminder of everything she feared she had lost. But even as she uttered the words, Sarah could feel the ground beneath her shifting, the fragile foundation of her life beginning to crack and splinter under the weight of suspicion. That tiny fissure of doubt, which had started as a mere whisper of unease, had now become a chasm, threatening to swallow everything she once believed was secure and unbreakable. As they drove home, the silence in the car was suffocating, and Sarah's grip on the steering wheel was so tight that her knuckles turned white. The dread that had taken root in her heart was growing, spreading like a dark shadow over her thoughts. She knew she had to confront this, to seek out the truth about her husband and the enigmatic young woman whose image allegedly occupied a place in his wallet, a truth that could very well shatter her world. When Jack stepped through the front door after a long day at work, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The house, usually filled with the sounds of family life, was eerily silent, the air heavy with a tension that prickled his skin. Sarah? Emily? I'm home, he called out, his voice echoing unnervingly in the stillness as he placed his briefcase on the floor. The silence stretched on, unnerving him, until he heard the faint creak of floorboards. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, her green eyes dark with a storm of emotions, her face pale, and the rims of her eyes red, as if she had been crying for hours. Hey, Jack said cautiously, a knot forming in his stomach. Is everything okay? Where's Emily? She's at Lily's for a sleepover, Sarah responded, her voice clipped and tense, the words coming out like sharp, cold blades. "We need to talk." A cold wave of fear washed over Jack, the kind that settles deep in the gut and refuses to leave. Nothing good ever followed those four words that carried the weight of impending doom. Okay, he replied hesitantly, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's going on? Did something happen?" Sarah's arms wrapped around herself, as if she was trying to hold herself together to protect herself from the storm brewing within. "You tell me, Jack, is there something you want to confess? Something you've been hiding from me?" Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to make sense of her accusation. "Hiding? Sarah, I don't understand what you're getting at. I'm not hiding anything from you." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped Sarah's lips as she shook her head in disbelief. "Really? Because that's not what I've heard. Emily says you've got a picture of the new daycare nurse, Veronica, tucked away in your wallet. She says you look at it when you think no one's watching. Do you care to explain that, Jack?" Jack blinked, utterly bewildered. "The daycare nurse? Sarah, this is crazy. I don't have pictures of anyone in my wallet except for you and Emily. I swear, I don't know what Emily thinks she saw, but it's not true." "Don't lie to me," Sarah snapped, her voice trembling with the force of her anger and hurt, fresh tears brimming in her eyes. "I saw her, Jack. I saw Veronica. She's young and beautiful and everything I'm not anymore. Is that why you've been sneaking around behind my back? Because I'm not enough for you now." Jack felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. He stared at his wife, his mind reeling, trying to grasp what was happening. "What? No, Sarah, you've got it all wrong. I've never even met this woman. I don't know where this is coming from, but I promise you, there's no one else. There could never be anyone else. I love you." He reached out to her, desperate to comfort her, to bridge the chasm that was rapidly forming between them, but Sarah recoiled as if his touch was poison. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't touch me. Don't tell me you love me when you're fantasizing about a woman half my age. I can't live like this anymore, Jack." Tears streamed down her face, but behind the grief, her expression hardened with a resolve that Jack had never seen before. It was a look that filled him with dread, a look that told him everything was about to change. "Sarah, please," Jack begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "You've got it all wrong. I swear, it's not what you think." "I want a divorce," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm, as though she had already made her decision. "I'll have the papers drawn up tomorrow. And tonight, I think you should stay at your office. I need time to think, to figure out what comes next." "Sarah, don't do this. Please." Jack's plea was cut off by the cold finality in her gaze. "Just go, Jack," she whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of all the emotions she could no longer hold back. "Just go." With those words, the life they had built together began to unravel, thread by thread, leaving behind only the echoes of what once was. She turned away, her shoulders slumping, her entire being folding in on itself like a flower wilting under the weight of a storm. In that moment, Jack knew with painful certainty that nothing he could say would break through the thick wall of hurt and betrayal that now separated them. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. With a heavy heart, he silently gathered his briefcase, the familiar object feeling foreign in his hands, and trudged toward the door. His mind swirled in a vortex of confusion and despair. How had everything unraveled so quickly? How could a simple, childish misunderstanding threaten to destroy the very foundation of his marriage in the blink of an eye? As the door clicked shut behind him, sealing him off from the home that had once been a sanctuary, a chilling thought struck Jack. Maybe this wasn't really about Veronica or Emily's wild story at all. Maybe Sarah had been searching for a reason, a pretext to escape, and this was the perfect opportunity to sever the ties that bound them. But why? What had he done to drive her to such a point of no return? The thought that Sarah, the woman he adored, might have been secretly unhappy, yearning for a way out, was like a dagger twisting in his heart. He loved Sarah and Emily more than life itself. The mere idea that Sarah had been harboring doubts, silently plotting her escape from their shared life, left him utterly shattered. In a daze, Jack drove to his office, the familiar route passing by in a blur. He arrived at the building, the sterile environment offering none of the comforts he so desperately craved. His key card beeped as he let himself in, the sound echoing eerily in the space. His desk was still cluttered with papers from the previous day's mergers and acquisitions, meeting a chaotic mess he couldn't bear to confront. Instead, he collapsed onto the small leather couch in the corner, not even bothering to remove his shoes or suit jacket. He stared up at the dark, oppressive ceiling, trying in vain to still the frantic thoughts racing through his mind. But peace was elusive, slipping through his fingers like sand. All night, a single question tortured him, replaying over and over in his exhausted mind. What was he going to do now? The next morning, Jack arrived at the Sunshine Daycare Center, his heart pounding with anxiety. He got there just as the first tiny, tottering students began to file inside, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. His rumpled suit and bloodshot eyes drew curious glances from the other parents, but he was oblivious to everything except his mission to get to the bottom of this disastrous misunderstanding and salvage what remained of his family. He spotted Mrs. Allen at the front entrance, welcoming the children with her usual warmth, and hurried over to her, his desperation evident in every step. "Mrs. Allen," he called out, his voice strained. "Can I speak with you for a moment? It's urgent." The plump, grandmotherly teacher turned toward him, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Of course, Mr. Spencer. Is everything all right? Where's Emily?" "She's with her mother," Jack replied curtly, his frustration barely contained. "Who, by the way, is talking about divorcing me? All because of some ridiculous story Emily told about me having a picture of the new nurse in my wallet." Mrs. Allen's eyes widened in shock, her face paling as the gravity of the situation sank in. "Oh my, Mr. Spencer, I'm so sorry. When Emily mentioned it yesterday, I never imagined it would lead to this." Her voice trailed off, and she looked genuinely distraught. Jack ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, feeling the roughness of the day-old growth. "I need to talk to this Veronica. I have to clear this up before it destroys everything." "Of course," Mrs. Allen said quickly, eager to help. "Let me get Miss Johnson to watch the children, and I'll take you to her office." Poor thing, she must be so confused about all this. A few minutes later, Jack found himself standing awkwardly in a small, brightly decorated nurse's office. The cheerful surroundings were at odds with the tension that thrummed through his body. Behind the desk sat Veronica, the young nurse at the center of this whirlwind, her expression a mixture of wariness and discomfort. "Mr. Spencer," she greeted him carefully, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "How can I help you?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his frayed nerves. "Veronica, I'm sorry to show up like this, but I need answers. My daughter claims I have a picture of you in my wallet, and now my wife is threatening to leave me over it. I need to know what's going on." Veronica's delicate brow furrowed in confusion. "A picture of me? That's impossible. We've never even met before." "I know," Jack said, his voice thick with desperation. "Believe me, I'm as confused as you are. Emily insists that I carry your photo, but it's just not true. The only pictures I have in my wallet are of Sarah and Emily. I don't understand where she's getting this idea." Veronica looked at him with genuine concern, her hands clasped together on the desk. "Mr. Spencer, I don't know what to say. This is all so strange. I don't have any explanation for why your daughter would think that, but I assure you, there's nothing between us. I've never even spoken to you before today." Jack nodded, trying to process her words, but the knot of anxiety in his chest refused to loosen. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he had no idea how to stop it. All he knew was that he couldn't lose Sarah, not like this. Not over a misunderstanding that made no sense, but as he stood there, staring at the woman who had unwittingly become the catalyst for the potential collapse of his marriage, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Jack reached into his back pocket and pulled out his weathered leather wallet, his hands trembling slightly as he did so. Veronica watched him intently, her gaze wary and curious. With deliberate care, Jack flipped it open and carefully extracted a small, yellowed photograph that had been tucked away behind Emily's latest school picture. "This is the only other photo I carry," Jack said, his voice tight with emotion as he held it out to her. "It's a picture of my mother. She passed away when I was a teenager." Veronica took the fragile photograph from his hand, her fingers brushing against the worn edges. As her eyes fell on the face in the photo, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. That's my mother. But how is this possible?" Jack's heart skipped a beat, his head snapping up in shock. "What?" Veronica's wide, astonished blue eyes met his, her expression a mirror of his disbelief. "This is my mother, Victoria. She died before I was born. My father used to tell me that I looked just like her." The realization hit Jack like a sledgehammer, knocking the wind out of him. "Your mother's name was Victoria and your father, Richard." Veronica's voice was soft, almost reverent. "Richard O'Connell." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jack's feet as the pieces of a long-buried puzzle fell into place with a sickening clarity. Richard O'Connell, his mother's second husband. The man she had married in secret when Jack was just a boy, before vanishing to start a new life, leaving him behind without a word. "I can't believe this," Jack croaked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "All these years I never knew." Veronica reached out and gripped his hand, her touch warm and steady, anchoring him to the moment. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, her expression a mixture of wonder and sorrow. "We're family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have a brother." Mrs. Allen, who had been silently watching the exchange, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the unexpected reunion. It was like something out of a storybook, two siblings, separated by a cruel twist of fate, now brought together by the innocent observation of a child. Jack's mind was spinning, the weight of this life-altering revelation pressing down on him. But amid the chaos of emotions, one thought blazed brightly in his mind: Sarah. He needed to see her, to explain everything, to beg for her forgiveness. He couldn't lose her, not now, not when they had already lost so much time to secrets and misunderstandings. He squeezed Veronica's hand, a silent promise that they would have time to explore their newfound connection later. But right now, he had to go. He had to save his marriage. "I'm so sorry, but I have to leave," Jack said, his voice urgent. "I need to talk to Sarah before this goes any further. But I want to know everything about you, about our family. Can we meet later tonight?" Veronica nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. "Yes, of course. I need to process all of this too. We'll talk then." With a grateful smile to a teary-eyed Mrs. Allen, Jack hurried out of the office, his heart pounding as he made his way to the car. He drove with a single-minded focus, the urgency of the situation pushing him forward. He had just gained a sister he never knew existed. He couldn't bear to lose the love of his life in the process. 6 months later, Jack found himself pacing the polished linoleum floor of Mercy General Hospital's maternity ward, his nerves frayed and his emotions a whirlwind. He couldn't remember ever feeling this scared, this exhilarated, this completely on edge, not even on that fateful day 6 months ago, when he had stood outside Sarah's lawyer's office, clutching divorce papers in his hand, ready to lay his heart at her feet in one last, desperate attempt to win her back. He still marveled at the fact that she had chosen him, chosen their family, despite everything they had been through. The door to the delivery room opened, and a nurse beckoned him inside. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself as he entered the room where Sarah lay, her face flushed with exertion but radiant with joy. In her arms, swaddled in a soft blanket, was their newborn son, a tiny bundle of life and hope. Tears filled Jack's eyes as he approached the bed, his heart swelling with an overwhelming love for the woman who had fought beside him through every trial, who had chosen to stay even when the path had been rough and uncertain. He gently took Sarah's hand, his voice choked with emotion as he whispered, "Thank you for giving us this chance, for giving us this life. I love you more than words can say." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I love you too, Jack. We've been through so much, but we made it. We're a family." Jack leaned down to kiss her forehead, a profound sense of peace settling over him for the first time in what felt like forever. They had been through the fire, but they had come out stronger, their bond unbreakable. And now, with their son in their arms and the promise of a future filled with love and new beginnings, Jack knew that they had truly found their way back to each other. The past 6 months had been a tumultuous journey filled with heartfelt apologies, deeply needed conversations, and tearful reconciliations as Jack and Sarah worked tirelessly to mend the frayed edges of their marriage. Each step had been challenging, but they were determined to stitch their tattered relationship back together, piece by piece. Emily had been ecstatic when her father moved back home, though the adjustment to having Aunt Veronica in their lives had taken some getting used to. The very thought that his little girl had unwittingly uncovered a hidden branch of their family tree, a branch Jack himself hadn't known existed, never ceased to amaze him. It was yet another reminder that Emily was truly one in a million. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The journey of rediscovery had extended beyond just his marriage. It had also been a time of rebuilding for Jack and Veronica. Together, they had delved into the past, unraveling the mysteries of their mother's life through late-night talks over steaming cups of coffee and by poring over old, faded photographs. With each discovery, they began to piece together the fragments of their shared history. The experience was surreal, wonderful, and bittersweet, filled with the warmth of newfound family and the sorrow of lost years. Now, in the sterile calm of the hospital waiting room, Veronica sat in a chair, watching her brother anxiously pacing back and forth, practically wearing a groove in the linoleum floor. "You're going to pass out if you don't start breathing," she remarked with a smirk. "I promise, Sarah's in good hands. Women have babies every day, you know." "I know," that Jack muttered, rubbing the back of his neck in agitation. "But that doesn't make it any less terrifying. I thought I'd be a seasoned pro at this the second time around, but I think I'm more on edge now than I was when Emily was born." Veronica quirked an eyebrow. "Probably because now you know exactly what to expect. The whole freaky Twilight Zone birth canal, the stitches, the..." "Please stop," Jack groaned, squeezing his eyes shut as if to block out the mental images. "I'm already struggling with the urge to storm in there and pull Sarah out before the spawn of Satan tears her apart." Veronica burst out laughing, the sound echoing in the quiet waiting room. "Wow, you might want to work on cleaning up that attitude before you meet your new sons for the first time." Jack blinked, momentarily lost in his thoughts before his sister's words registered. His head snapped up in shock. "Sons? Wait, how do you know it's a boy?" Veronica's eyes widened in a flash of panic, and she bit her lip nervously. "A lucky guess," Jack said in a warning tone, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Did Sarah tell you something that she didn't tell me?" Veronica squirmed in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, not exactly. It's just that during her last ultrasound, the doctor thought he might have seen. You know what? Forget it. It's probably nothing." She plastered on a bright smile, but it fooled no one. Jack opened his mouth, ready to unleash a barrage of questions, but at that moment, the double doors to the delivery ward swung open with a soft whoosh. A nurse in pink scrubs stepped out, her face lit up with a warm, welcoming smile. Jack's heart leaped into his throat, pounding with anticipation. This was at the moment that would change everything. "Mr. Spencer," the nurse called out, scanning the waiting room. "That's me," Jack croaked, raising a trembling hand. His voice was thick with emotion. "Is my wife?" The nurse's smile widened as she stepped closer, her voice gentle and reassuring. "Your wife is doing just fine, Mr. Spencer. And you have not one, but two healthy baby boys waiting to meet their daddy." Jack's knees nearly buckled as the reality of her words sank in. Twin boys. He had been so caught up in the anxiety of the moment that he hadn't even considered the possibility of two. His eyes filled with tears of joy and relief, and he felt Veronica's hand on his shoulder, steadying him as he absorbed the news. "Two boys," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Veronica said softly, her eyes shining with happiness for her brother. "Now go meet your sons." Jack nodded, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, love, gratitude, all before hurrying toward the delivery room. As he stepped through the doors, the sight that greeted him took his breath away. Sarah lay in bed, exhausted but glowing, with two tiny, wriggling bundles nestled in her arms. He moved to her side, his heart overflowing as he gazed down at his newborn sons. The weight of everything they had been through melted away in that moment, replaced by the purest joy he had ever known. "We did it," Sarah, Jack murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We made it through everything. And now look at us. Look at our family." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears of happiness. "I love you, Jack. I love our family. And I'm so glad we fought for this." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Me too, Sarah. Me too." As he cradled one of his sons in his arms, Jack felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The journey that had brought them to this moment had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every tear, and every hard-fought reconciliation. And now, with his family complete and his heart full, Jack knew that this was only the beginning of a new, beautiful chapter in their lives. "Your wife is doing splendidly," the nurse reassured Jack, her voice brimming with warmth. "Congratulations, Dad, you have two healthy baby boys." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Jack felt as though the entire world had tilted on its axis. He reached out, gripping the back of a nearby chair to steady himself, certain that he must have misheard. "Two," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Did you say?" The nurse's grin widened, lighting up her face. "That's right, twins. They're a little on the small side, but that's completely normal. You can come back and see them now." Jack turned to Veronica, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She jumped up from her chair, her face breaking into a wide smile as she threw her arms around him, laughing with pure joy. "Oh my God, Jack, did you hear that? Twins. And boys, just like I accidentally spoiled the surprise about 30 seconds ago." Jack hugged her back automatically, his mind still reeling from the news. Twins. Two boys. He was now the father of 3 children. How had this happened? The magnitude of it all was overwhelming, almost too much to process at the moment. Dimly, he felt Veronica pull away, giving him a gentle shove toward the delivery ward doors. "Go," she urged, her eyes misty with emotion. "Go kiss your amazing wife and meet your sons." Nodding numbly, Jack followed the nurse down the corridor, his steps slow and measured as if he were walking in a dream. The bright lights, the sterile scent of antiseptic, the distant hum of hospital machinery, all of it faded into the background as he approached the room where his life was about to change forever. When they reached room 2187, Jack paused, staring at the small placard that bore Sarah's name in neat black letters. His heart pounded in his chest, every beat echoing in his ears. Gathering his courage, he pushed the door open and stepped into the dimly lit room. There, lying on the bed, was Sarah. She looked utterly exhausted yet radiantly beautiful, cradling two impossibly tiny bundles close to her chest. The sight took Jack's breath away. She glanced up, meeting his shell-shocked gaze, and a serene, beatific smile spread across her face. "Hey, Dad," she whispered. "Come meet your boys." He'd drawn to her, as if by an invisible force. Jack crossed the room and sank onto the mattress beside her. Up close, he could see the delicate features of his newborn sons, their downy hair, the tiny, scrunched-up faces peeking out from beneath the blankets. They were perfect, more perfect than he could have ever imagined. "Oh my God," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, they're incredible. You're incredible. I can't believe you did this." With trembling fingers, he reached out to stroke one of the baby's tiny brows, marveling at how soft and fragile the skin felt under his touch. One of the boys stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, revealing a pair of unfocused but beautifully blue eyes. It was a sight that made Jack's heart swell with an almost unbearable joy. "I know we only picked out one name," Sarah murmured, her voice warm and full of love, "since someone wanted to be surprised." "In my defense, I was only expecting one surprise," Jack joked weakly, his eyes still glued to the miracles in Sarah's arms. "Well, now we need to come up with another name," she continued. "I was thinking William, after your grandpa, and maybe Noah, since he came to us like his biblical namesake on a wave we never saw coming." William and Noah, Jack repeated in awe, the names rolling off his tongue as if they had always belonged to these little boys. They're perfect. His heart overflowed with love as he gazed at his wife, the woman who had given him everything he could have ever wanted and more. "God, I love you so much. Thank you for this, for not giving up on us." Tears welled in his eyes as he leaned in to kiss Sarah gently, pouring all of his love and gratitude into that simple gesture. She tasted like sweat, salt, and the promise of a new beginning. When they pulled apart, Sarah smiled up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for fighting for us, for our family," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just so sorry Jack silenced her with another kiss, tender and full of reassurance. "No more sorries," he murmured against her lips. "We're done with that now. The past is behind us. All I want is to enjoy this moment, this incredible present you've given me." He looked down at William and Noah, his heart nearly bursting with love and protectiveness as he marveled at how perfectly they fit within the circle of Sarah's arms. He knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with love, laughter, and the joy of raising their three beautiful children together. Just then, a soft knock sounded at the door, and it creaked open slightly. Veronica's beaming face peeked through the gap. "Can Auntie V come in and get some baby snuggles?" she stage whispered, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "And there's a very eager big sister out here too." Jack glanced at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. "Let them in," she said warmly. "It's time for this family to be together." The door burst open, and Emily came bounding into the room, her pigtails bouncing as she squealed with delight. She clambered onto the bed, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the sight of her new baby brothers. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 5 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. "They look like raisins," she announced with a gleeful giggle. Veronica settled on the bed beside Emily, her arms ready for the first baby snuggle. As the family gathered close, laughter and love filled the room, creating a warm, joyful atmosphere that was almost palpable. This was the life they had fought for, the family they had nearly lost but ultimately reclaimed. And now, with the arrival of William and Noah, their hearts and homes were fuller than ever before. Jack leaned back, letting the warmth and noise of his family wash over him. The sight of the people he cherished most in the world gathered together filled his heart to the brim, making it feel as though it might burst from the sheer intensity of his emotions. He couldn't help but marvel at the scene before him as newborn sons nestled safely in Sarah's arms, Emily's joyful chatter filling the room, and Veronica's gentle presence completing the picture. It was a moment so perfect, so profoundly beautiful, that it took his breath away. His eyes met Sarah's across the heads of their children, and in that shared gaze, Jack saw the same incandescent wonder, the same deep, abiding gratitude reflected at him. It was a look that spoke of every hardship they had endured, every tear they had shed, and every fear they had faced together. They had weathered the storm and come out on the other side, stronger, more united, and more deeply in love than ever before. As an unexpected surge of emotion tightened his throat, Jack finally let the tears fall. These were not tears of sorrow or regret, but of overwhelming joy, tears born of a soul-deep thankfulness for the twists and turns life had thrown his way. It was almost unbelievable to think that this incredible journey had all begun with one little girl's innocent observation, a simple mistake that had snowballed into the most harrowing challenge of his life, only to ultimately lead him to this moment of pure, unfiltered happiness. The universe, with all its mysteries and unexpected detours, had brought him here. As Jack sat in that hospital room, surrounded by the laughter and love of his pieced-together family, he knew without a doubt that he wouldn't change a single thing. Not the fear, not the heartache, not the moments of doubt, none of it. Every twist in the road had led him to this, to the greatest gifts he could have ever imagined. Smiling through his tears, Jack whispered a silent thank you to the forces that had guided him, that had brought him back to the love of his life, and that had blessed him with this beautiful, chaotic family. The world had tested him, had pushed him to his limits, but it had also shown him the true meaning of love, resilience, and gratitude. And as he sat there, with his heart so full it felt like it might shatter, Jack realized that for all the lost pictures in the world, for all the what-ifs and might have been, he wouldn't trade this moment for anything. This was his life, messy, unpredictable, and utterly perfect in its imperfection. And for that, he was profoundly, eternally grateful. As we come to the end of this journey, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the story we've just shared. Jack and Sarah's experience is a powerful reminder of the importance of perseverance, love, and the unexpected blessings that life can bring, even amid challenges. So I ask you, what have you learned from this story? What is one thing that resonated with you, something that you will take with you and practice in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us all of the beauty in life's twists and turns. Thank you for watching.